is that the greatest fear that any human being has by nature is to be held accountable by a God who is holy.
Interesting. Well, what do you picture when you think of a Christian?
I think of a man, and I take away reason and accountability.
Hello, everyone. I'm Professor Plank. I respond to various theological and ideological questions and claims from a rationalistic and naturalistic approach in an effort to give and explain the opposite viewpoint and help to balance the conversation. Today we are going to be hearing a sermon from R.C. Sproul and Ligonier Ministries, in which he's going to be trying to explain the psychology of atheists. By the way, Sproul, who died back in 2017, was not a psychologist, a trained mental health professional, or in any way did he have any expertise that would give him any kind of credence when commenting on mental states of others. If he had, he would have known right off the bat that it's a bad idea to attempt to shoehorn a one-size-fits-all motivation to an entire group of people that numbers in the hundreds of millions all across the world. But, things like nuance and shades of gray and subtle distinctions between different people is all too complicated to get into when you're trying to whip a neat and tidy message to your congregation that can make them feel safe and secure in the idea that they have the right position on any theistic question. And it's those damn dirty atheists who are all just ne'er-do-wells and rapscallions wallowing in their desire to sin. And that's what he's really doing here today. That's who this message is for, his congregation, the faithful. Like so many apologists, he's preaching to the literal and proverbial choir so that they'll stay resolute in their faith. I mean, after all, this would really be a piss-poor way to try to convert non-believers. Nobody likes people making snap judgments and assumptions about them based on biased reasoning, so this wouldn't get very far in winning over converts. But talking about a group is always liable to invoke a response from the group you're talking about, and so, since RC is talking about us atheists, he's going to get a piece of my atheist mind. Well, not him specifically, being as he's gone, but certainly those members of his ministry who come along in his wake, continually reposting his speeches years after his death. So let's get stuck in and hear from the dearly departed RC about the thought processes of people he could never understand. But before we get into that, if you end up liking what you see in this video and would like to help out the channel, make sure you subscribe, click the bell so you'll always be notified when new content comes out. Check out my social media, including my Patreon and Twitter, all linked in the description. And of course, like this video, maybe pop in a comment. All that goes a long way towards pleasing the YouTube algorithm. And I know I'm preaching to the digital choir when I tell all you dear viewers to praise Algorithmo. May it keep my channel motoring along. Now on to today's video.
The apostle is saying there is a psychology to atheism, because he goes on to say what it is that we fear more than nature, more than meaninglessness, is that the greatest fear that any human being has by nature is to be held accountable by a God who is holy.
I would greatly disagree. I mean, for a variety of reasons, that fear doesn't even crack the top 10 of the greatest human fears. There's things like fear of the dark, fear of all the kind of creepy crawlies out there, the fear of clowns. Or, as a communications professor, one that I found often ranks higher than death on many people's fear list, number 1 with a bullet, the fear of public speaking. Not only is fear of being held accountable to a God less basic than all of those, but also because there are plenty of human societies and civilizations throughout history who haven't necessarily believed in an afterlife at all, or believed in one that no God had any specific control over, like reincarnation being a result of a person's karma rather than decree of any higher being. But because that specific fear of a God holding people accountable in an afterlife is better explained as an extension of the fear of the unknown. I mean, that is the overarching reason why religion was cooked up by people in the first place, to assuage their fears about what happens after death, or to give themselves confidence in the random and seemingly chaotic nature of nature. So instead of having to think that bad things are going to randomly happen sometimes for no rhyme or reason, but they can instead grab hold of some peace of mind by telling themselves that, don't worry, everything is under the control of an all-powerful being who's going to make sure that the good are rewarded for being good and the wicked will pay for their wicked ways. Or, all more succinctly put,
sometimes shit happens, someone has to deal with it, and who are you going to call?
That all stems from a desire to reduce uncertainty. You can minimize the fear you have about what might happen and what might go wrong at any given moment if you can convince yourself that nothing happens outside of the control of some all-powerful deity, and that you're properly booed up with that particular deity. So even if it seems like bad stuff is happening seemingly at random to you, don't worry, it's all part of the Big G's plan, and you'll be made better for all of this bad shit befalling you. And even if it lasts throughout the rest of your life, don't worry, you'll get your just rewards in the afterlife. That is all just a response to the fear of the unknown, which is the real greatest fear that humans have wrestled with throughout our time on this planet. And it comes in a variety of forms. It's actually been pretty useful to us throughout our evolution. The more we feared where sickness and disease comes from, the more we've been motivated to learn about it so that we could develop treatments and medicines to combat it. The more we learn to take care of and heal ourselves, the longer we live and the more we increase the quality of life by alleviating those ailments. Or, another example, the more we fear the large, dangerous, even monstrous animals, all with sharp fangs and claws that wanted to make meals out of us, the more we were driven to learn about their habits and tendencies, their biology and life cycles. Ultimately, what motivates them to do what they do, especially when doing what they do involved running us down and eating us. And look what that desire to reduce that fear of the unknown led us to do. We downright domesticated half of those things that used to eat us and turned some of them into our best friends. Now, the problem arises when people aren't willing to do the due diligence of actually learning the how and the why of whatever it is that is unknown to them, and instead supplanting supernatural explanations and causes, because hell, it's easier to appeal to magic than it is to do any of that annoying book learning.
Because in the presence of the holy, we are immediately exposed of being unholy.
What an utterly useless and downright meaningless statement. Holy essentially just means being of God, or intrinsic to God's nature. God is holy automatically, just by virtue of being God. So anything that is not God automatically falls down as less holy. Even things that are anointed by any supposed god can be considered more holy than things that aren't, but nothing that is not God could ever be considered as holy as God. And since holy is an adjective that describes a thing, it really can only be seen in degrees in comparison to something else. For instance, a mouse is small compared to an elephant, but a mouse is big compared to an atom. Lava is hot compared to ice cream, but cold compared to a lightning bolt. Humans, being the supposed most favored creation of God, and the only life form God supposedly truly cares about, made in His image and all of that, well, humans are certainly more holy than, say, snakes, cursed to crawl on their bellies for all their days as punishment for the whole Garden of Eden debacle. You know, despite the fact that the omnipotent God knew and actually intended for all of that to happen, as nothing is supposed to be beyond God's foreknowledge and outside of His master plan, but I digress. We are certainly more holy than the serpent, who did what God intended for him to do, but humans compared to God are unholy, because nothing can be as holy as the thing the word holy was made to describe. And by the way, none of this is any explanation as why holy is a desirable thing to be in the first place. Remember, holy just means being of God or in God's nature. Holy doesn't mean good. Holy doesn't mean benevolent. Holy doesn't even slightly imply not being a complete and total shithead. God is considered holy just by virtue of being God. Anything God does is a holy act just because God does it. Giving babies cancer? That's holy, because God does it. But developing non-natural, non-homeopathic cancer treatments, like chemotherapy or radiation treatments, that's not holy, because it's humans who do that stuff. Or at least less holy than giving babies cancer. Global genocide by way of flood? That's holy. But becoming a lifeguard and saving people from drowning? That's unholy. Sending people to everlasting torment for not accepting and loving you? That's holy. Never holding anything your children do to you against them, no matter what, because you actually love them unconditionally? Something not all humans do, but many do. Well, that's unholy. If the measure of what it means to be holy is the track record of the supposed God that Christians worship, I have no interest in being holy, and certainly no fear of not measuring up to God in terms of His holiness.
And so the God of Scripture is a God who is omniscient, who knows everything about us. He's a God who is omnipotent, who is all-powerful. He's a God who is altogether holy, and worst of all, He's immutable.
Interesting that he conveniently left out the third aspect of the traditional tri-omni characteristics that are commonly attributed to the Christian God. Omnibenevolent. Oh sure, he got the omnipotent and the omniscient parts, but he slid into holy rather than omnibenevolent. Again, making it out that holy is an intrinsically desirable characteristic to have. But holy is not synonymous with omnibenevolent, although many people of faith tend to use the two interchangeably. It's the whole idea of God being good all the time, that goodness is intrinsic to God's nature. And so, if holy is intrinsic to God's nature too, then goodness and holiness must essentially be one and the same. This is also where you get the idea of divine command theory from. This is the idea that asserts that morality is dependent on the will or commands of a divine being or deity. So if everything God does is automatically good, and everything God does is automatically holy, then holy and good can be seen as synonymous. Of course, anyone who hasn't drank that particular divine command Kool-Aid can see the flaws in this, as well as the flaw in the idea that God is supposedly immutable and incapable of change. The idea that God is incapable of doing anything wrong or of changing is refuted by their own holy book. God drowns the world, but then makes a rainbow as a promise to never again do anything that severe or drastic. So it was right for God to do a genocide and drown the world back then, but then he changed his mind as to global genocide and vowed never to do it again. That in fact, it would be wrong of him to do such a thing again. So he changed his mind on genocide. Not to mention how much Christians like to talk about the difference between the Old Covenant and the New Covenant. That all the rules and prohibitions laid out in the Old Testament no longer apply, because that was the Old Covenant. And the birth, life, and death of Jesus was the fulfilling of the Old Covenant and the beginning of the New. So then God changed his mind about the rules and standards that should be followed. The old rules were fine for all the time leading up until Jesus' life and death, but then they needed to wipe that slate clean and set down new rules and standards. So God can't be bad, except when he is, but that's not really him being bad because he's holy. And God can't change, except all the times that he does, but that doesn't really count because he's God and thus immutable. But I mean, what would Christians be doing if they weren't trying to have their cake and eat it too?
There is no hope that he'll ever grow weak and lose his omnipotence. There is no hope that he'll ever have a senior moment and lose his knowledge of everything that I've ever done. He will never get Alzheimer's disease.
And that notion is based on what? I mean, I know, same place that all of their notions of God come from, their holy book. You know, the Alpha and the Omega and all that, beginning and the end. But aside from the supposed word of God claiming that God is never going to weaken or lose power, where does that notion come from? I mean, you can't just take him at his word. What would you expect a cosmic dictator who maintains his authority through fear of his divine power to ever admit to his divine power being finite?
It's not the lash they fear. It is my divine power.
And before this battle was over, that even a god king can bleed.
Hey, God says that he's the beginning and the end of all things, and God would never lie, despite the fact that that would mean that he isn't omnipotent, and that humans have an ability to do something that God cannot, and also ignoring, all the times that the Bible even talks about God's ability to lie, and all the times that he literally lied. But ignore all that. Believe in God's eternal power because God says so. Nope, nothing wrong with that logic.
There's no hope that he'll ever compromise his righteousness or his holiness.
See there? Righteousness and holiness said in the same breath, as if they were synonyms.
You keep using the word. I don't think it means what you think it means.
Because he is immutably holy, immutably omnipotent, and immutably omniscient. And all of these things are revealed through nature, and we know it by nature.
What the fuck? None of these things are revealed through nature. All of those things, the entire Christian idea of God being omnipotent, omniscient, and holy, which again does not mean benevolent, are only revealed through the Bible. But certainly not through nature. How can I prove that? Well, how about the fact that humans have existed on this earth, surrounded by all of this nature that R.C. claims reveals the specific traits of the Christian God, for something over 200,000 years. And yet, the idea of one all-powerful God didn't even begin in crossing people's minds until about 3,400 years ago. That means that almost certainly 99+% of human existence, humans' theistic belief has been exclusively polytheistic, believing in many gods, all of whom were not omnipotent or omniscient, and whose supposed holiness only extended as far as the faith of those who prayed to that specific god, while others within their same culture prayed to different gods who they believed were more holy. Even the most ardent proponents of the teleological argument, the idea that the universe and the natural world appears too ordered for it not to be the work of some divine power, well, they only use that argument to attempt to get to the idea of some higher power, some divine creator. It's a large jump to go from, look at the trees, to go to, that tree proves the Christian God specifically is the only one who could have done it all.
And because that is so terrifying, it is our basic disposition as fallen creatures to have a vested interest to flee, since Adam and Eve fled the garden and hid in the bushes because they were naked and they were ashamed. That's the biggest barrier we have to coming to a full understanding of God, that we too are naked and we know it.
The idea that atheism is rooted in fear of being held accountable by God is so completely bass-ackwards that I would be surprised that Christians keep trying to make it if I didn't understand their motivation being to convince themselves that they are totally right in their religious conviction and only needing the faintest, barely cogent arguments to get them there. Well, that and keeping the congregation also so convinced. Look, if I truly believed in a God and feared that that God would hold me accountable for all of the supposed wickedness that I've engaged in, You know, all of the sleeping in on Sundays, thinking love is love no matter who you feel it for, not wanting to own slaves, and the horrid offense of eating shellfish when I go to Red Lobster, then I would abso-fucking-lutely still be a Christian. Particularly a Catholic, like I was raised as, where I can just go into the confessional, tell it all to a priest, then say a few Our Fathers, couple of Hail Marys, and I'm all square with the cosmic house again. It's you Christians who are running from accountability for your supposed transgressions. You're the ones who run from the responsibility for your wrongdoings. What's that? You're a man of the cloth who horribly assaulted some of your altar boys? Well, as long as you confess to another priest and promise to never ever do it again, we'll shuffle you off to another church somewhere and pay hush money to the victim's family and convince them that it's in their best interest if this all just went away quietly. And the perpetrator will never have to pay for their crimes. They'll never have to publicly own up to them and admit to their wrongdoing. They'll never have to face their victims and afford them any sort of closure or healing or justice. And if you're not a Catholic specifically, just replace the priest with any other type of Christian. Because it's all largely the same. You get away with whatever you want, both in this world and in the one you believe is yet to come, just by saying you're sorry to the right person or silently to an imagined supernatural being. With that person you're confessing to never being the one who you actually wronged. The dirty little secret at the core of Christianity is avoiding responsibility for everything you do. So that was R.C. Sproul, further bamboozling his congregation about the horrible, fearful, and shame-filled nature of atheists, who are just running from a God that they truly believe in to try to avoid accountability, even though that idea doesn't make a lick of sense. As always, the projection is high with this one, accusing atheists of the very thing they themselves are doing every time they go to church or fold their hands and pray in silence. They're just trying to get clear of what they think they've done wrong without being held to account for it. You know you've got your crowd eating out of the palm of your hand when you can say something as batshit crazy as nature proves that God exists and is omnipotent, omniscient, and holy, and not even feel the need to explain that load of horse dookie. So, God is so all-powerful that he designed us as a poorly slapped-together mishmash of barely functioning biological systems, vestigial organs, and inefficient, energy-draining parts. God is so all-knowing that he doesn't even know how to redeem his own favored creation without enacting a global genocide. So immutable that he wipes out everything that he told his chosen people and makes a whole new set of rules that those very chosen people won't follow, because they can't even be convinced that their own God's Son was their own God's Son. And so holy that he perpetrates every horror upon humanity that even the most twisted, sadistic human mind could never have come up with on their own. But we are the fallen creatures who fall short of his glory. Of course, he was certainly talking about atheists and not to atheists. Certainly he wasn't trying to convince non-believers of anything, but was just reinforcing the already solid beliefs of a faithful congregation. But even for a sycophantic audience, this was so weak of an argument, it can barely be called an argument at all. He was just stating nonsensical shit and watching his flock of sheep eat it up with a spoon. So that is where we'll end things for today. So thanks for watching, everyone. Don't forget to like this video, comment, and subscribe so you'll always be notified when a new video comes out. Don't forget to check me out on Twitter and Patreon if you'd like to support my work directly. My Teespring if you want some Plinky merch. All that link below in the description. Special shout out to my most recent super thankers here on YouTube, Salvi Mike, Midship's Friend, and James LaMica. Until next time, I'm Professor Plink, reminding you to keep striving for greater understanding. It's the best way to get wherever you want to go.